Well, good morning. We are back again for the final day of our seminar together, in which we will go over Unit 7, 8, 9, and the writing about literature models. So we've got a lot ahead of us. I hope you're feeling fresh and energetic and alert. But let's turn to page 109, where we will begin the section here on inventive writing. And let me just revisit this page 7 chart so that you see where we are in the process. We've covered the 1 and 2, keywords from every sentence. Unit 3 was the shift. Keywords not from the paper, but from our mind, from our brain. Unit 4, back on the paper, looking for extracting important, interesting, important, or relevant facts. Unit 5, back on the other side, where we're pulling the keywords out of the mind by asking questions about pictures that hopefully stimulate some ideas. Unit 6, multiple references. We have too many sources with too many facts, and we have to organize them a little bit. So building our logic there. And now we are in Unit 7. We used to call creative, but have changed it to inventive writing. Because it's a little more accurate, and it's also a little less cliched. If you say the term creative writing, it causes people to have kind of concepts that come out of the brain. For me, creative writing was, as I said, the only class I ever got a C in, and it was a horrible experience. So I didn't like the idea of creative writing. And it's also a very big area and could include all sorts of things like poetry, which I love and we promote, but it's not part of this syllabus. So we changed it to inventive writing. And there is historical value in this word because if you go back and look at the 5 canons of rhetoric, of ancient rhetoric, a lot of people know 3 of them, but there's actually 5. And the 5 canons of ancient rhetoric were invention, i.e. coming up with something to say, arrangement, i.e. structure, how to organize ideas, elocution, i.e. how to phrase things, how to say things, the vocabulary, the grammar, i.e. the style. Then there's one canon, it's kind of the forgotten canon, and that's ironic because it is memory. And so in the ancient world, people would memorize great, huge chunks of poetry and literature, and they would furnish their mind with ideas and vocabulary so that when they did the invention and arrangement and elocution, they would have a richness. I love that idea, furnish the mind. Isn't that a great phrase? Because you think, okay, you have a home. You furnish the home with, hopefully, elegant, useful, quality things, right? And then your home becomes more useful. You want to furnish your mind with elegant, quality, useful vocabulary, syntax, and ideas. So I talk quite a lot about the value of memorized language, the value of listening a lot to build the language database. If you have not heard my talk, Nurturing Competent Communicators, that I feel is just one of the most important things that I have ever talked about, and I hope you will. And so that canon of memory, and then the 5th canon is specific to oral delivery, so practicing the public speaking skills. So in a way, what we are doing with the structure and style syllabus is very, very much what was being done in the ancient times to train speakers and writers and rhetoricians. Today, the word rhetoric has kind of got a bad rep, you know. if you hear a news person say rhetoric, it's probably in a cynical way, saying, that's not a real good argument, that's just rhetoric. But in the true sense of the word, it's the art of persuasion. And we who hope to know and teach the truth need that art as much as anyone. So there is a valid reason for studying rhetoric, although it's kind of been marginalized in modern education. But we've got it all. What we do is we put the arrangement first to give a sense of structure with the structural models, right? The units here. We put the elocution also in the beginning so the kids can learn stylistic techniques, right? So we have the structure and style, and it's in Unit 7 where we reach, really, the problem flat out of invention. Because in Unit 7, it's just you, your brain, and whatever you happen to carry around in it. That's the sole source of information. There's no story, there's no pictures, there's no source text, right? And as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of programs start here. But what we have found is if you provide the content and gradually build the thinking skills, then when you get here, very few students have that blank page, blank brain, frustration, writer's block problem. So it works so very, very well. And this, of course, is also the skill that you would need if you're taking, say, a standardized writing test, or if your district or school or state wants to test writing. They'll usually give prompts to children, right? You've seen prompts and things like, describe one of your favorite places to be, right? Or tell about a trip you took once. Or sometimes they'll do a narrative prompt. You come out of your house, you see a cardboard box in your front yard. It starts to move. Tell the story, right? So a narrative, imaginative. A little bit older, middle school, they'll give things like, compare two restaurants you're familiar with. And then they'll start to get into opinion-based prompts, like, write a letter to the principal arguing why we should be allowed to chew gum in school, right? Or even get issues that kids are concerned with, right? So should talking on the cell phone and driving a car at the same time be illegal or not, right? So all of that is in this whole area of inventive writing. If you notice on page 109, the mini poster there is the My Dog model. And we use that because it's kind of stereotypical, right? Write about your dog. Of course, if you don't have any training, a child with no training asked to write about his dog will very often come up with something like this. My dog is named Spot, and he is a really great dog. He is really fun to play with and a really, really cool dog. I really love my awesome dog, Spot. Okay, only 250 more words to go. What are you going to say, right? And so the problem is, without some training, what happens when kids do this is they become kind of, what's just the next thing I can think to say? What's just something I can write? And it becomes rambling. It very often becomes redundant. Very often becomes something that no one would want to read. And the kids know that. This is one reason why I am not a big fan of enforced or compulsory journal writing. Now, if you've got a kid who likes to write down what she's thinking and feeling so she can reflect on that later, that's different. But in terms of saying, okay, children, you have to write in your journal for 10 minutes every day, well, very often what you get is just this kind of undisciplined, random dumping of whatever they can come up with. So if you like the idea of journaling, or better, I would call keeping a day book, or what George Wythe had Thomas Jefferson do, is a commonplace book. Or if you're teaching in a school where this is part of what you have to do, then I would strongly recommend that you do the journaling the way we're going to do this Unit 7. And that is make an outline first. We're all about separating complexity. That's everything we do in the structural models, is we think first and then write. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? I know when I was growing up, my father probably said to me hundreds, if not thousands of times during my childhood, "Andy, think before you speak." Evidently, I had a problem with that, possibly still do. But if it's important to think before you speak, how much more important is it to think before you write? And so if you have that discipline established in Unit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6, when you get to Unit 7, you will have the habit of thinking what you're going to write first, and you can always do a better job of writing it if you've thought it through first. And it can be a way of operating. In fact, I was very gratified. I have one daughter. She was probably 12 at the time, 11 or 12. And she had never known any approach to writing other than this system, which I had taught her for a few years. So I came into the living room one day. She's sitting there making what looks to be a keyword outline, just sitting there with a little notebook. I said, "Julia, what you doing?" She said, "I'm making a keyword outline." I said, "What for?" She said, "I'm going to write a letter to my friend." See, she had been trained to do that, to think first. And she knew it was a better approach because it made it easier in the long run. So if you can get the students at a young age and train them up, then that discipline of separating complexity is part of who they are. And they'll carry that into college or the business world or life, wherever they end up going. And then if you have older students that haven't had that growing up, you can still establish it, which is, again, why. I said this yesterday, and I'll reiterate. It's why, even with older students, high school students, even with college students, starting with Unit 1 and 2 and teaching that keyword outline skill can make all the difference in the world. And I know, actually, some of you have said to me, I had, son, daughter, who did this in school and went off to college and is now finding it very easy to be successful, to write the papers. In fact, I get a lot of stories of, well, my son, he used to hate writing, and then he did this writing program, and now he's in college, and he's teaching his roommate how to write papers. Why? Because it became natural, became a part of them. So, the MyDog model is a 5-paragraph model as it is presented here. This is where we introduce the introduction and 3 topics and a conclusion. And we'll go ahead and work with this, but I will then show you how you can do inventive writing with fewer, or I suppose more, paragraphs if you would like. So we'll look at a 1-paragraph or 2-paragraph inventive writing example, as well as the formal 5-paragraph, which mirrors the basic essay of Unit 8. So it's kind of nice to introduce the introduction and conclusion here in Unit 7, because then when you get to Unit 8, there's really nothing terribly new about it. It's just putting pieces together in a slightly different way. If you take a peek at page 112, you will see there kind of a list of possible ideas. This is certainly not an exhaustive list. You've probably got books on your own that have lists like this that give suggestions for creative writing or inventive writing assignments. And it's not as though it's all fiction or nonfiction, because some of it could be based on real experience, and other could be fantasy or imagination. The difference is that it's coming from your own mind, your experience or your imagination there. Annoying things. That would be easy because everybody has a few annoying things they could talk about. Some of us have a lot of things that annoy us, but I'm not sure everybody would enjoy reading that, but it'd be a good one. Babysitters, babysitting. Kids often have experience on one or both sides of that equation. Bee stings. Now, being invisible, that's kind of more on the fantastic side, isn't it? So tell three ways you could get in trouble if you could be invisible, you know. Being lost, best present to give or get. Biography of an old person. I have done this one several times with several groups of students, and I find it to be a very good activity. Now, I don't tell them they have to find an old person, because then they might call me. But I tell them what they should do is find a person that you don't already know well. So someone not in your family, or if they're in your family, someone you don't know that much about, you know, a family friend, maybe, you know, a teacher, pastor at church, something like that, and write a little biographical sketch of this person using the 5-paragraph format. And I find that this is a very good skill developing thing for them, because it forces them to ask someone questions, right? They have to find a person and then start asking enough questions to find 3 topics, 3 main things they want to write about. And then they have to ask enough questions of that person to get enough details to be able to then write a whole paragraph about each of those topics. And so it's almost a little bit like field research. But what I love is the fact that it requires the student to go out and ask the questions. Because as we talked about yesterday, that's the trick of thinking, right? To be able to ask the questions of yourself. So it promotes that. Childhood toy, clocks, countries, travel brochure, dreams. That could be hard for some people, but it could be interpreted many different ways, right? Electricity out, most people have experience with that, and you know, what are 3 things you do when the electricity goes out? Fireworks, fun in the car. Now that's kind of an oxymoron. Unless, of course, you're 16 and you just got your driver's license. Handicaps, helping at home, heroes. Historic people would almost push into Unit 8, where you need to do some research, right, to collect up some real facts. So, here's a stereotypical one. How to be successful in school. 5th graders write a letter to the 4th graders telling them how to be successful in 5th grade. Inventions. One year, the state of Alaska had their benchmarks that included a writing prompt. And one year, the 3rd grade writing prompt was this: think of something that has not yet been invented. Describe what it is, how it works, and why it would be a good idea. Can you just imagine all those little 9-year-olds sitting there? Think of something that doesn't exist. Some kids survived, usually by coming up with a machine that would change water into ice cream, you know. But it wasn't a great year for the writing scores on the Alaska benchmarks that year. It was a tough prompt. But writing prompts is tough for tests, because you have to think of something that nobody has specific knowledge of, but that everybody knows something about. So it's kind of hard to find that. Kitchen. I like to work with places. Kids can practice describing places creatively. Magic wand, camping experiences, New Year's resolutions. I don't think people do that anymore. News. This is a fun one. Especially if you have a little group, you could do it as a family project or a co-op. Certainly a classroom can do this. Create a little newspaper, right? And each student is responsible to go out and write about something that's happening in the community or in the school or in the activity or in the family. And so we've done this a few times with my group, and it's kind of fun. They get to be a little news reporter and figure out what they want to report on. We give assignments, so you know, the kid who's into sports gets to report on the sports, and usually have one who knows something about what's going on in politics, and then the one who doesn't like to write, they get to make the crossword puzzle. Occupations, that would be a good one you could kind of combine with the interview. Find someone who has an interesting job and interview them about their job, and then write that up into a paper. Our school, our home. How How about that? Describe the perfect student. Or if you're really ambitious, let them try the next one. Describe the perfect teacher. Pets. You know, I've noticed something in years of doing this. If you ask, usually young children, middle school age maybe, but if you ask kids to write about whatever they want to, they will very often choose animals, pets, and sports. And I've noticed these are two of the hardest things to write about. And I finally figured out why. It's because there's not a lot of words connected with it, right? They don't talk. They're just things you experience. They're visceral, emotional. You know, you have your pet, you love your pet. It's an emotional thing, but it's hard for kids to translate that into words. Same thing with sports. They just do sports. It's harder to talk about. Whereas people, places, events, there's more words connected, so a little bit easier. But it's good practice. Restaurants, self-introduction. I often do kind of a public speaking boot camp. In fact, we have a product called Speech Boot Camp. Maybe some of you have heard of it. And pretty much I always start the first speech you give for boot camp is a self-introduction in the 3-point model. So a little background information for an introduction, 3 things about yourself, and a little conclusion, what's the most important thing. So it's a good kind of formal speech follows the formal essay type of arrangement as well. Slumber party, I don't recommend that. Space travel, special treasures, the year, 3 wishes, time machine. Time machine, that's kind of a good one because if you know something about history, anything, you can go to that point and talk about that. And if you don't, you can go into the future and make stuff up science fiction-wise. So that would be kind of a good prompt because it would be something that everybody could probably think of something. True stories, visitors, winter sports, zoo, and you probably think of some more. But that's a smattering to get you started there. And there are lots of possible ways that you can use this inventive writing idea. You can just write a paper like a description. You could write a letter. You could use it for a letter format. Your personal story, your testimony can work for a how-to. That's a common prompt. Describe how to, do something. So let's go ahead and put some up on the board. We're going to skip these student samples right now and come back and look at them a little bit later. But turn, if you will, to page 122. And page 122, you'll see that there's kind of a blank place here for writing a composition outline of the 5 paragraph lengths. And remember, as I said, we'll do 5 paragraphs. We'll show you how that whole thing works. And then we'll explain how you could do this in a shorter, simpler way for younger children, or a shorter way if you just needed something a little bit shorter. But I like to kind of start with just getting the skeleton up so that students see, okay, this is where we're headed. This is the target. And the introduction and conclusion in their most basic form, which is where we want to start, are pretty consistent. They have certain jobs that don't really change all that much. And so we can go ahead and put that in, and that's going to be pretty much the same for whatever you're writing. The first thing the introduction would do is kind of grab the attention of the reader. Some kind of hook, some kind of interesting little, well, what could you use for attention getter? Okay, a question, maybe a quotation, maybe a short, if it was short, a short little vignette or dramatic opening story. Anything with a bit of shock value, right? Some kind of shocking thing that you might say, oh, wow, I didn't know that. grab your attention. Also, you can use stylistic techniques, some of those decorations like alliteration or very short sentences, right? So actually any of those decorations will function there. And I think it's good for you as teachers of writing to kind of get the habit of looking for things that do a good job of grabbing your attention, right? So you're, surfing the net, reading articles, looking in magazines, newspapers. Notice when you read a first sentence or two or three of something, notice your reaction. Did that grab me? Was that interesting? Does that make me want to read on? And if so, try and figure out what that was. Or, tear it out of the magazine, print it out, throw it in a file called Good Attention Getters. And then you'll have examples to show to students. So that can be helpful. The second thing the introduction generally will do is give background information. Background information would be facts that are not included in your topics, but might help the reader get oriented toward the subject. So, in the case of my dog, you might say, when did you get him, and how big is he, and what does he look? Well, if he looks like, that's a topic. Where would you find him if you came to my house? Is he inside dog, outside dog, right? So things that are dealing with the context or the time or the place can be good background information. That beef up the introduction a bit. And then generally you want to enumerate or state your topics, which in this case there would be 3. So you kind of let the reader know this is what you're going to hear about. And that's pretty consistent with a few variations depending on your purpose and audience for Unit 7, 8, and the whole idea of formal essays. The conclusion also has a couple jobs. One would be to restate the topics or to echo those topics. And then what you'd like to do is kind of end with a little bit of a oomph, right? You want that article to try to clinch it to a degree, to make you feel like, yes, this is what I should remember from all that, right? And one good way to do that is what's sometimes called amplification. What we say to the kids is, choose something that you said, one of the topics or maybe one of the details inside of the topics, anything really. But of all that you told me about your dog, of all that you told me about your backyard, of all that you told me about the aliens from planet Zug, what really is most significant, most notable? So we will put that word most on the checklist and require it to be in the concluding paragraph so that it kind of forces the students. And then you can say whatever you want, most significant, most important, most interesting, most dangerous, most, any word that follows. But when you have the most, it forces the superlative and it brings focus. And don't just leave it at there. The third thing you want to do is say why. So of all that you told me about that thing, what's the most important, what should I remember, and why? Now this becomes extremely important later on, Unit 8. So if you're using 5 paragraphs in Unit 7, you introduce this idea and you put it on the checklist and they get the habit there. And it's very interesting how that word most forces a bit of focus. You'll see that, I think. Okay, so that's the schematic. Then, of course, we have room for 3 topics, right? So we have, call it topic A, topic B, topic C. And the My Dog poster indicates that 3 possible topics would be the way my dog looks, the way my dog eats, and the way my dog does tricks, right? And so now you've had that first division. And division is one of the really key things that students need to learn to start this whole process. I guess the best way is just let's do one together. This is a group practicum exercise here. So to do it, we need to come up with a subject. We need to come up with a subject. Now, I would recommend that we try to find something which is kind of small, kind of not all that big, not significant, that if I said, write 500 words about this thing, you might think, wow, that'd be kind of hard. There's just, I mean, what can you say about pocket lint, you know, something like that. So give me some suggestions. What are some possibilities?
Ice weather.
Nice weather. Well, that's big. Think smaller. Think small.
Ice cream.
Ice cream. That's really big. Shrink that down. Toppings. Sprinkles. That would be small. What do you think? Hairspray. Well, one topic would be jokes for sure. Hairspray. Gel pens, spoons, done that. Red lipstick.
Glass board.
A mouse.
Glasses.
Chewing gum, did that. That's actually a huge topic. Think small. Really small.
Cotton balls.
Cotton balls. Cotton balls. I have never done cotton balls. I've done pocket lint. We even once did watching paint dry. But I've never done cotton balls. All right, let's just check and be sure this is a good one. If I said to y'all, take out a couple sheets of paper and write a 500-word composition on cotton balls, how many of you might feel that to be a bit daunting? Great, this will work perfect. All right, cotton balls. Now, the very first step here is to make the initial division of cotton balls into possible topics. Things about, aspects pertaining to, elements of cotton balls. What would be some possible topics? Can you think of any?
Appearance.
Okay, appearance. Quality.
Uses.
Texture.
Uses.
Where they're stored.
Storage.
History.
History.
Texture.
Would that go with quality or not?
Maybe appearance.
Yeah.
Craft projects.
Well, we'll stick it in there. Texture.
Crafts.
Crafts.
Hey.
That would
Uses.
kind of fall under uses, but I guess you could have, uses could really be too, kind of the common and the uncommon. So you could either make that into two topics, or you could make it one topic with two parts to it. What else? Say again?
That's history.
Originate. Well, that'd probably be a bit like history. Problems?
Manufacturing, maybe?
Okay, making. Anything else? That's a pretty good list. Now, stop. I want you to ask yourself a very important question. Of those of you who thought writing 500 words about cotton balls, how many of you now feel it would be much easier? Isn't that interesting? That is a paradigm shift. That is when new information changes your reality, right? Because what seemed daunting, because it was maybe just too non-specific and little and insignificant, now seems much bigger. There's a lot more ideas that you can have. And I would argue that this is the door through which the writer must pass. This is the door through which the students must pass. If they can get this far, it's almost downhill from there. If they can't do this, they're dead in the water. And this is a thing you can start training, you can start teaching children even before they ever able to write sentences in paragraphs. You can actually train the mind to do this. I believe it's something that Aristotle called noticing things, or simple apprehension. And it's the skill of division, seeing into something. I would do this with my young children. I'd be driving along, have 3 kids in the car. We'd pass a graveyard, a cemetery, right? I'd say, hey kids, there's a graveyard. What are some things about, aspects of, or topics pertaining to graveyards? I kind of redefine it a few ways for different age kids. And they would just start looking, and what do they see? What might they say? Tombstones. Upkeep. Flowers. Dead bodies.
Arrangement.
Ghosts. Patterns. Who's there? Yeah, so now you've driven past a graveyard, but you haven't seen just a graveyard. You've seen into it. You with me on this? Hey, there's a tree. What are some things about, aspects of, or topics pertaining to trees? What might they say? Leaves. Bark. Colors of trees. Types of trees. Birds and things that live in trees.
Climbing.
Yeah, if you're my son, there's only 2 topics. Climbing and building forts in trees, right? Uses of trees. Location of trees. Favorite trees. Okay, so now you've seen not just a tree, but you've seen into a tree. You with me on this? You can even try it with abstract concepts, such as friendship. What are some things about, aspects of, or topics pertaining to friendship?
Conversation.
Conversation. Trust.
Loyalty.
Loyalty. Duration.
Common interest.
Common interest.
Companionship.
Varieties of friendship. Conflict within friendship. Forgiveness. You see how now you've seen not just friendship, you've seen into it. This is the necessary skill to see into things like that. If I were teaching 5th grade, for some reason, I don't think it'll ever happen again, but if I were teaching 5th grade, I would do one thing pretty much every day of the school year. One little short activity designed to promote this. I would throw one word on the board and say, okay guys, you've got 3 minutes to write down as many things about, aspects of, or topics pertaining to this as you can think of. Ready, set, go. So maybe I throw carpet, right? Probably a concrete abstract noun, maybe a gerund. Carpet. Okay, so now some kids in the group are going to be naturally a little better at this than others. They're going to write colors, vacuuming, flying carpets, hiding nasty food under, rolling, right? And they'll think of half a dozen things. And there'll be other kids in the group who'll just be sitting there going, brown, bing, time's up. But then I would take a few minutes and make the master list. Get the ideas from everybody, put them up on the board, and show how many aspects and things about and possible topics there are pertaining to that one idea. And if you did this regularly, say every day for 30 or 40 weeks of a school year, what would happen to that little guy who on the first day could only think of one thing? What would happen by the end of that? He would get the hang of it. He would learn how to do it by seeing examples after examples after examples after examples. Thinking is a teachable, learnable skill. And so you can try that. In fact, I've been teaching that for many years now. And I had one teacher who came back to me and said, you know what, I tried that. We did that almost every day for a year, and I can't even tell you how the creativity exploded in my class, how excited they were to find out every day what it was, and how it carried over into their creative writing. So I know it works. So you might give it a shot. It's easier to do with a group, right? It's a little bit harder to do, with just 1 or 2 kids on your own. But that's it. Once you get that, it's downhill from there. So that's the first step. really. First step, subject. Second step, possible topics. Third step, we need to choose. We need to choose however many we need. Now, in this case, we need 3. So we'd like to choose 3, and probably 3 that would be the most fun to write about. We could be the most creative or inventive. Ones that might go together. What do you like? Uses? Okay. You want to make it 1 topic or 2? 2, okay. We got the common uses and the uncommon uses. Problems. All right, there we go. Now, one thing we could think about is anything we would want to say about, say, appearance or history or texture. Since these are not topics now, a few little facts pertaining to that could make their way into the background information, right? Now, we don't, I mean, I don't, maybe you do. I don't actually know any history of cotton balls. So if I wanted to write about the history of cotton balls or the manufacturing of them, right, I would have 2 options. 1, go research a little bit, read something, find out, put it in my brain, then I'd have it. Or I could pull a Dave Barry and make up a fictional history of cotton balls and do satire, right? You ever read Dave Barry? He's so funny because he says these things that are so ridiculous, you know that it's not true, right? And then he throws in some fact that you actually think that could possibly be true. And so he's playing a little game with you there, right? But that's fun, a satirical or fictional history of something. It's a valid genre called humor writing, right? Although we try to discourage that when the kids are doing their essay tests in class, right? All right. Which do you want to go first? Probably that order. Common uses, uncommon uses, and problems? Okay, so let's go ahead and put that into our outline. Uses, I'll just put cotton balls for cotton balls since we're going to say that a lot of time. Common. Uses for cotton balls that are less common or uncommon. And problems that you might encounter with cotton balls. All right, so we've accomplished that step. We've chosen the topics and arranged them in a sequence. And now we're at the next step, which is to think of the details, right? So, how do you think? If you can't answer this question, you have not been listening. Ask questions. So again, we want the list. We want the litany. We want the habitual idea. What are the big 6?
Who, when,
Where?
Who, when,
When,
who, what,
where,
why,
why, and how.
how. Those are the big 6. You know, I had this very charming experience a few years ago. I was teaching in Hawaii, and I was doing a little writing class with some young children, and I had this little Asian girl in this class. She couldn't have been a day over 7. She was so tiny, and she was very sweet. And I started the class, and as I usually do when I start student classes, I try to, kind of handle the people who don't want to be there, because very often, as you can imagine, people will put their kids in my class and the kids don't want to be there. That idea of, a week of 3-hour writing classes is not very appealing to some. So I try to, dissolve some of the opposition. So I usually run a dialogue that sounds like this. How many of you, don't like writing? You'd rather scrub floors than write paragraphs, right? Usually a majority of the kids. How many of you like writing? You get a few. This little Asian girl, she pops up out of her chair and says, I love writing. I said, okay, that's great. Now, of those of you who don't like writing, how many of you have this problem? Someone wants you to write something and you don't know what to write about, and that's really frustrating. Does anyone ever have that problem? All the people who don't like writing, that's their problem. This little girl, I always know what to write about. So I'm curious and I say to her, how do you always know what to write about? She said, my mommy taught me. So I'm thinking, her mom probably got our seminar and taught her all about keyword outlines and story sequence chart and dress-ups and all that, and she knows everything. So I said, so did your mom teach you about keyword outline and story sequence chart and dress-ups and all that? No. So now I'm really curious. What did her mom teach her that she always knows what to write about? So I asked her, I said, what did your mom teach you that you always know what to write about? She said, my mommy taught me if you want to know what to write about, you just ask yourself who, what, where, why, when, how. Who, what, where, why, when, how. If you just say who, what, where, why, when, how, you'll always know what to write about. I was in awe. A 7-year-old being taught to think gives you hope for the world. But that's the habit. And I think that many times the habit of asking questions is gradually trained out of people. Very often the schools will do this, not necessarily intentionally, but think about school. For a lot of people, it kind of goes like this. You go there, and they give you information, even before you ask for it. Then, you massage it around a little bit. With little kids, that's called games, and with older people, it's called homework. Then, you go back to the school, and they ask you questions. If you give the right answers to their questions, you win the game. If you give the wrong answers, you lose the game. If you refuse to answer, they kick you out. But if you become a person who asks too many questions yourself, you're not just irritating, you're dangerous. That's why we, as teachers of writing, we are subversive. We cannot possibly do our job and not have as a byproduct people who think better. And I don't know about you, but I would like to see an improvement in the thinking skills in this world. So we start simply. Now, there are a few other questions that might help us with this particular unit. One is we can introduce some of the sensory questions. What are the 5 senses?
Touch.
Okay, so kind of an extension. What do you feel? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? Now, not all of those are obviously going to work for every topic, right? I suppose some people could be tasting their cotton balls. But that would be part of the problem, yeah. So these sensory questions are kind of a subset, and those are helpful. You can also give the kids kind of a set of what you might call philosophical or maybe even more critical questions, right? Such as, what's the best thing about something? What's the worst thing about something? If it's not a topic, it can be a question. Are there problems with something? And if there's problems, there's always what? Solutions or answers, yes. So what are the solutions to those problems? And then you can really wax philosophical if you want and have them ask questions such as, what is the value of something? What's the significance? What's the meaning of it all? If cotton balls were an icon, what would they represent? What's the symbol, right? So these questions, obviously, younger children, simpler questions. Older students, you can push them towards harder and harder questions. But you want that habit of asking questions, because then it's pretty easy. Ask yourself a question. If you get an answer, write it down. If not, try a different question, right? So let's go ahead and do that with this. Common uses for cotton balls. All right. What, I guess, would be the question. What is the most common use?
First aid.
Removing nail
Pill
polish.
bottle.
Oh, we have a disagreement.
Oh.
Okay, I guess we can't say what is the most. What are the few most?
Nail polish remover.
Removing nail polish.
Really?
Yeah.
Oddly, I've never done that. All right, nail polish. You put the remover on the cotton, and then you rub your finger with it.
Oh, you have done it.
I have a daughter. I think she does this every day, but I've never seen it. All right, so nail polish remover. Another one. Someone said first aid. First aid. What kind of situation?
Alcohol, cleaning, wound.
You apply alcohol or
Cleaning wounds, based.
how do you spell alcohol? A-C.
O-H-O-L.
Okay. There you go. Okay, that was right. Alcohol or
Peroxide.
peroxide. Okay.
Kindergarten crafts.
Well, wouldn't that be more into the uncommon?
Packing the pill bottles.
Oh, packing the pill box. Why do they do that?
So it doesn't rattle.
The pills from crumbling.
Tricking you into thinking there's more in it than there is. You buy something that big and half of it's cotton and you're like, that's what I got for $12? All right, let's see. Any more kind of common uses?
Makeup removal.
Cleaning your ears.
That's Q-tips.
That's probably more common. Makeup removal. Why is cotton a good thing to use for makeup removal? Soft. Absorbent. All right. Let's just, we kind of got a lot of information with just that one question. Let's try another one though. Who is most likely to use cotton balls?
A mom.
Ladies.
Moms and ladies, yes.
Women.
Nurses?
Females. More than men, I think, at least in my experience. Nurses. Pharmacists, all right. Let's see. Oh, grab one more. What do cotton balls feel like when you use them to remove makeup or? It's a soft feeling.
Gentle.
It's a kindness.
Yes.
Cotton balls kind of show the gentle side of medicine and
Mother.
cosmetics. All right, soft, gentle side. So if you wanted a symbol, if you wanted to use a cotton ball for a symbol, it could represent
Tender loving care.
TLC. There we go. The normal use of cotton balls could be symbolically summarized: tender, loving care. All right, uncommon uses. Now, you crafts people.
George Washington wigs.
All right, kindergarten craft. Could you please give me
Hair.
an example of what you would do here? Oh, clouds. Making clouds on 3D artwork.
Right, or beard.
All right.
She said wig.
George Washington's hair.
Okay, George Washington wigs?
My son's kindergarten teacher just did that like 3 days ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Did it require a lot of cotton?
She had them all wear the same wig one at a time.
Ah. So they all got to be George Washington, but she didn't have to clear out the Walmart supply of cotton balls to do
She
it.
took a picture.
Fire starter.
Really?
The Boy Scouts do that. They did cotton balls and Vaseline.
Boy Scouts use cotton as a fire starter. I never knew that. That seems too easy, almost like cheating. You've got to go get your wet pine needles and do it
It's in
somehow.
your first aid kit.
It's in your first aid kit. Yeah, okay. Let's try to think. What is the most weird? What is the best uncommon? The strangest thing you ever imagined?
I see a lot of people put the cotton in their ears when they're flying.
Oh, to block out the sound?
I don't know. I think it doesn't
Well, that's part of first aid, though, when you have an earache.
But you're not applying anything. It's different. Yeah.
Well, now my wife, she likes to sleep with earplugs, but her ears were getting messed up, so she started using cotton in her ears to block sound. So I guess, yeah, earplug substitute. No.
The what?
Shoe deodorizer?
With baking soda. What? Hey, there's benefits to brainstorms.
Vanilla?
That is good.
Vanilla essence in the fridge with cotton balls.
You're serious? Wow. I'm going to try that. I think it'd be nice to open up your refrigerator and smell vanilla. Better than what I usually smell. All right. Vanilla essence, soaked cotton ball. Do you use just regular extract?
Yes.
In the fridge. I'm getting excited about this. All right. Anything else? What is this show about cotton balls? What significance? Versatile. Perhaps the uses are endless. We could go on and on. Timeless. And inexpensive.
It's good.
The glorious cotton. A versatile, timeless instrument. That feels right there like I might want to steal that and put that in the conclusion, don't you think? That final statement about cotton. All right, now we do have this other topic on problems. Let's see. Well, I guess we're back to what? What kind of problems might we have?
Run out.
Shredding. Lint.
They break apart, and then they could clog up the drains. All right.
You run out of them when
That's what I was thinking when you run out.
They break and shred and clog and shed. All right, we'll put break, shred, and shed. And then they clog.
Oh, they're not reusable.
They're not reusable. They're disposable.
If a toddler or animal gets a hold of them, it'd be a mess.
Choking hazard.
It could well be. Yes, they could clog your drains, or they could clog the nose. They could clog any number of things. Someone mentioned you don't have it when you need it.
Running out.
There's a principle behind that. It's the Murphy's Law of cotton balls. You will not find one when you most need one, right? All right, so Murphy's Law of cotton balls.
and if you let them out of the bag, they go everywhere.
Oh, they're hard to control, aren't they? They almost have a life of their own, these little wild... Hard, contain, control. If the boys get a hold of him,
They could be dangerous.
how?
Because they're going to turn them into spitwads and spit them out.
They don't throw. They don't make good ammo.
No.
That's a problem for boys. Not good ammo.
Unless they're wet.
Oh,
Oh, you can set them on fire and
all right. Flaming ammo.
Boy Scouts taught them bad tricks with balls.
All right. That's probably enough. Do you think we have enough? And the fact is, once we get writing, we might think of more stuff. How many of you now feel, wow, it might be hard to limit yourself to 500 words. Anyone having that feeling? You see the shift? So that's the basic approach that I would take with students, showing them how to ask various questions, depending on the subjects and the topics. Some questions work better than others. Some questions work again and again. But you want them to have that habit. And of course, it's a little easier to do this in a group, right? Brainstorming naturally happens better in groups because someone can ask a question, someone else can offer an answer, that will spark someone else to have an idea. And so this is a lot more fun to do together. It's a little bit harder, right, to do in a smaller group, and it's a little bit lonely to do on your own, but it's necessary, right? Because if the kids have to go in and write an essay on a test, they have to be able to ask the questions to themselves, answer the questions by themselves, and plan out a composition. Now, I'll reiterate the idea that I don't feel married to this thing, right? And you shouldn't either. When you go and finish this practicum assignment by writing your essay on cotton balls, right? You don't have to use everything that's there. If you're writing along and say, no, I don't really like that idea, throw it out. Oh, here's something I just thought of, put it in, right? You can do that. So organizationally, a first draft, like I said, and then if you change on the fly, then your actual first prose draft is almost like a second one, and so you get a level of refinement there. Now, I would like to mention a couple things about this 5-paragraph structure, okay? And then I'll show you some examples of how you can do something shorter, or longer, or different. But 2 things. Number 1, always write your essays of 5 paragraphs or more from the inside out. And try and train your students to do this also. And when I say that, what I mean is write the body paragraphs first, the conclusion second, and the introduction last. And there are a couple very good reasons to do this. One reason is, if you've written everything but the introduction, you will actually know much better what you're introducing, right? So you'll be able to choose some background information to set the context for the topics once you've wrestled them out on paper. So you'll always know better how to introduce something once you really know what it is. And you'll really know what it is better by just writing it out. That's one reason. Another reason is, of all that's there, what do you think is the hardest thing for a lot of people? Attention getter, right? Because that's where you have to think of something clever. So what happens is kids say, okay, I'm going to write my essay, and the first thing I have to do is think of something clever. But I can't think of anything clever. But I can't start until I think of something clever. But I can't think of anything clever, right? And that's where a writer's block kind of situation can come. Even if you have an outline, you can get that writer's block because of that. Whereas, if you start with your first topic and just start talking about the uses, common uses of cotton balls, and work through and get all the way there, that gives your brain lots of time to semi-consciously toss around a few ideas of what might be a clever way to start, right? So you can avoid the writer's block problem. Now, kids often don't want to do this. They want to procrastinate to the last minute, start at the beginning, right to the end, and be done. That's, unfortunately, student nature, right? So you can't really force them to do it this way, but you can set it up so they're most likely to do it this way if you give different due dates, right? So first due date, body paragraphs, that's all I want to see. Next due date, body paragraphs and conclusion, that's all I want to see. Final due date, the entire thing. You can't prevent them from writing the whole thing beginning to end, but student nature being what it is, they will probably do what's required when it's required and not much more, right? So you can kind of trick them into doing the right thing. But it always works much better. The only time it wouldn't work to do that is if you were in a timed, prompt-based testing environment where they say you have a certain amount of time to write this essay question or answer this prompt. In that case, you kind of have to start from beginning to end. You don't have a way around it. But outside that kind of artificial world, first, second, last, always works better. Now, the other thing I'll say at this juncture is that this 5-paragraph model is very old. It's very old. And like old things, it has, to some people, become a bit cliche, i.e. overused, right? And there are some teachers who don't like it. In fact, I have met kids who've said, well, you know, the professor said on the first day of class, if I turn in a 5-paragraph essay, it's an automatic F. Well, good. In that class, don't do it. There was even a blog post by, I think it was the Chicago Public School Teacher of the Year, who wrote very eloquent 2,000-word blog post on why 5-paragraph essays were so bad. It was entitled, "If you are writing or teaching 5-paragraph essays, stop it now." Right? I have an acquaintance who grades SAT tests. He says if he sees a 5-paragraph essay, he marks it down. Why? He doesn't like it. The argument against that generally goes like this. It's too formulaic. It's too contrived. It's too limiting. It stifles creativity. It becomes a crutch. If it's the only thing students learn, that's very bad. It's repetitive. In fact, the Chicago guy said it's useless. That's their argument. Now, I would counter back and say, okay, it is formulaic. It is a structure. It's been around for a long time. There's a certain amount of embedded repetition, but that's not necessarily bad. I think it was Aristotle who first pointed out the fact that human beings are a little dense. We need to hear things more than once. So when you're teaching, it's a good thing to kind of tell people what you're going to tell them and then tell them with as much detail as time and space and allow, and then remind them what you told them so that with embedded repetition, they're more likely to remember something, right? Well, human beings are still a little dense. So embedded repetition, if it's well done, does not have to be redundant or useless. I would argue that it's a structure. If you learn one structure, then you can have variations on that structure. If you don't learn a structure, how will you ever learn any structure? Do you see? Furthermore, if you think about it, if it was the only thing that anybody learned, that might be better than nothing, right? So, I understand their arguments, but I don't think it's a bad thing per se to have learned. But if you end up in a college class and the teacher says, I hate 5-paragraph essays, well, obviously, don't do it, right? But it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing to have learned. It means he's tired. He's so tired of it, he should perhaps consider becoming retired. Now, if you're working with younger children, you might want to start with a shorter inventive writing idea. One of those would be a single paragraph where you could basically just say, here's your subject, cotton balls, ask a bunch of questions, and write one paragraph about cotton balls. Couldn't we have done that? And so if we have one paragraph, then our subject is our topic. It's the same, right? We could also have said, let's make our length dictate structure. Our goal is 2 paragraphs, therefore we need 2 topics, right? So we could have written about the uses of cotton balls and the problems with cotton balls and just had 2 paragraphs, right? We could choose any of the topics we had and write paragraphs corresponding with that number of topics. It's generally, when you get to 3, that's when you feel the need for the introduction conclusion with a little bit of embedded repetition. I know this happens to me, it's that third thing. I'm driving home. My wife calls and says, we need milk. Okay, I'll stop and get milk. 2 minutes later, she calls me again. We need sourdough bread. Okay, milk, sourdough. I can do this. 2 minutes later, she calls me. We also need, and I'm thinking, okay, I better write this down now because I'm doomed to forget one of these things if I don't. So it's kind of that third thing that sends us into that need for a little more repetition and framework. And then, of course, we could have 4 topics, couldn't we? 5 topics, have an expanded essay model. And when we get to Unit 8 in a short time, I'm going to show you all sorts of variants on the 5-paragraph model. So you can start with 1, you can start with 2, you can start with 3 plus introduction, conclusion. We'll teach that. I want to tell you one little story that just illustrates this, the process and how it works so well. I was in Portland years ago, and I had a little guy in my class named Nicholas. Sweet little boy, 9 years old. First day, this was when I was doing the 4-day classes. I was in Portland 4 days, every day, student writing intensive. First day, he's a little bit hesitant. You can kind of tell. Writing is not his thing. He's not all that happy about being there. But by the end of the first day, he was fine because we, did our little boy who cried, or the boy in the nuts, and got his hand stuck in the jar, and he learned his ly and tried his who which, right? So the next day he comes in, and he's happy to be there because this system of keyword outline and checklist is just fitting his personality. So he gets there early and says, can I help you? What are we going to do today? I said, well, today we're going to write longer stories. And he says, well, I'm not very good at writing a story. Oh, don't worry, I'm going to give you a story, right? So I give him The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and he writes The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and he learns his strong verb, and he puts down at the bottom, and all they ever found was his bloody cap. And he called it The Bloody Cap. And he was very pleased. And so the next day, he's really enjoying this. He comes into class and he says, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do today? And I said, well, today we're going to write reports. Oh, reports about what? Whooping cranes. Well, I don't know anything. Don't worry. I give them the mini books on the whooping cranes, and they learn the topic clincher rule and everything's. He gets his, memorizes his when, while, where, as, if, although, whatever. And he writes his little thing about how the windpipe of the whooping crane is coiled up in its chest and it can blast out a kilometer. And then the 4th day, last day of the class, he shows up and he's all excited. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? I said, well, just wait. It's going to be different. So I said to the kids, every day so far this week, we've done kind of the same thing. I gave you something, you took notes from it, and you wrote from the notes. But today, I'm not going to give you anything. But you still have to take notes. Where are you going to get your notes from? One kid said, you're going to tell us something, right? No. From your brain. You're going to have to take notes from your brain, right? Now, the problem with a lot of kids is they're not even sure what's in their brain to begin with. So I usually start with a little exercise of brain inventory, right? And so I usually start out and say, okay, pull out a fresh piece of paper and put stuff in brain, right? And make a list. And I usually make a list of stuff that's in my brain. And I say, I lived in Japan for 3 years, so I know about Japan. And I have an interesting church, so I know about my church. I travel in hotels and airports a lot, so I know about hotels and airports. I have a wife, don't know that much about her, but I do have one wife. And I just make a list of, my stuff. And then I say, okay, everybody kind of make a list of stuff in your brain. And it usually is going pretty well, a lot of the girls are writing down, horses, guinea pigs, gymnastics. The boys are, Nintendo 64, Xbox, Y box. And the girls are gymnastics, Awana. The boys are baseball, basketball. Usually going pretty well. I'm walking around the room to be sure everybody's kind of on track. And little Nicholas there, he's sitting there. And he's holding his pen. And he's got this blank paper and this kind of blank look on his face. So I pull my usual trick. I say nice and loud, oh, you have a house. You know something about your house. Well, I bet someone else has a house or an apartment or somewhere where they live. Oh, you've been to Six Flags. Well, I wonder if anyone else around here has been to Six Flags. Oh, you know about your grandma. Well, I bet somebody else might have a grandma or a grandpa or an aunt or an uncle or a mom that they know something about, right? So I'm trying to shovel ideas his way. Not catching. He's sitting there, blank face, blank paper. So I determine that it's time for direct intervention. So I come over and I say, Nick, how's it going? And in very stereotypical fashion, he begins to hyperventilate. I just don't know what's in my brain. So now I have a problem. This is free enterprise education. Everyone's supposed to be happy, and I've got a crying kid. So, you know, and someone else is over there. I've got 12 things. Okay, go for 50. I got a problem. So I'm thinking, I don't know what to do, you know. And so, okay, we had to change tacks. Okay, everybody stop. Okay, Nick, just stop. Don't worry. This is not a problem. Distraction. So I say, okay, we're done with that now. Nick, do this. Put a Roman numeral right there, right? Okay? Now, under that, how many details did we have yesterday on our Humpback Whales report? Yes, 5. You got it. So put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right there. Okay, now what word do we put at the end of the paragraph? Do you remember? Clincher, right. So let's put clincher. And let's just review that topic clincher rule. Shall we, everybody together? The topic sentence and the clincher sentence must repeat or reflect 2 or 3 key words. Okay, so now he's not crying anymore. He's sufficiently distracted. I still don't know what I'm going to do. I get an idea. And I said, Nick, when you go home today, if you don't have to do any chores or schoolwork and you could do anything you want, what would you do? And it was Portland, so it was raining. And he said, Legos. And I said, Legos. Nick, you know about Legos, don't you? So do this. Put this word Legos right there. Put a comma. Now finish the sentence for me. Legos are fun. Fun. Legos are fun. And then I said, now fun is actually on the banned words list, but we won't worry about that now. We'll go ahead and put it there and we'll look for a substitute later on. Now, Nick, all you have to do is ask yourself some questions about Legos. Who plays with Legos? What do you do with Legos? Why do people play with Legos? How exactly do you play with Legos? What do you think or feel while you're playing with Legos? Are there any problems with Legos? Well, now his little brain started spinning, and in a relatively short period of time, he had completed the outline, and he wrote this little composition you can read on page 113. The awesome Legos. Legos are a neat toy because they can be put together and taken apart again and again. Isn't that a great topic sentence? They are fun to play with when my mother lets me. I let it slip. I concentrate mainly on the finished project while I build. Now, he was very proud of the word concentrate because he had written, I think about. But think was on the banned words list. So he had to look for a substitute, and he found concentrate. It was the perfect one. By sharing, everyone can join in, but my brother, who is 6, is particularly interested. Now, he's basically got all his checklist done, right? So he's just cooking. He's on the home stretch here. It is great to build and feel the thrill of being creative. The only distraction is that I play with them when I am not supposed to. Overall, Legos are great toys for building, creativeness, and pleasure. Now, you have to say, that's good writing for a person of any age. It's descriptive, it's clear, it's detailed, and it's enjoyable, right? And how did this happen? How did this little boy go from blank brain, blank paper, panic to writing that in less than 1 hour time? Well, it was the 3 things. The structure. He knew what it was going to look like. He had a target. He had something to aim for, something to imitate. Number 2, the method of thinking, the list of questions to ask himself, to get the ideas, to invent the ideas. And number 3, the stylistic checklist that forced him to use words he might not normally have used and put him in a more creative mode so that he kind of continued that excellent vocabulary and more complex, meaningful sentence structure. Do you see? So those 3 things, the structure, the method, the style. And one little thing just came to mind I thought I would like to share with you before we finish up Unit 7. It's another reason why invention is such a good word to use for this. And it has to do with the root meaning. Now you probably think of invent as a word meaning think of something new, right? We think of an invention. You think of something that nobody else thought of, you patent it, you make $1 million, right? You create something. But nobody creates something from nothing. So what's really interesting is the root. It comes from invenio, which is Latin for to find or discover, but it's also the root of, guess what? Inventory. You find out what you have so that you can create something. Isn't that neat? I just love word study when you kind of look at the roots and see how they're put together in different pieces, and there's nuances of meaning that come through when you do that. So I encourage all of you to, of course, study Latin and teach explicitly Greek and Latin word roots to your students as well. A few more samples, just point out to you, and then we'll wrap it up here. Page 113, there's a sample by Fiona, who happens to be my daughter. And she was about 10 or 11 when she wrote this. And a little bit interesting story behind this. Fiona has always been kind of had an aptness for writing. She hasn't really had a struggle like some other children. And she knew our system very well because she'd been in classes with me for years. And so she probably knew it almost well enough to teach it. And I said to her one day, you know, Fiona, I only have 5-paragraph samples here. I would really like a 2-paragraph creative writing sample. Would you do one for my workbook to show to people? She said, sure. So she's sitting in my office. I'm sitting in my office. And she says, Daddy, I don't know what to write about. I said, well, you can write about anything you want. We just got back from that rafting trip. That was kind of fun. How about that? She said, oh, that's a good idea. Right? So she's sitting there. I'm working. I think she's off running. A couple minutes later, she goes, Daddy, I don't know what to write about. I said, well, you're going to write on the rafting trip, right? She goes, yeah, but I don't know what. I said, well, you know the process. You have to think of the possible topics. Oh. So what are some things that you would think about when you remember the rafting trip? Well, there was the rapids. Okay, write that down. Camping. Okay, write that down. Food. Write that down. When you fell off, write that down. Right? And so she just would remember the things, and I would just say, write it down. Right? So then I thought, okay, she's fine. Right? And as soon as she started writing, right, as soon as she started the outline, it all came out instantly. She was able to think about, okay, rapids. There was class 1 rapids and class 2 rapids and class 3 rapids, right? She was able to do the thinking, but she was stuck at that first moment, that first division, right? And all it needed to be was me giving her permission, essentially, to write it down. Do you see? So I think that's an example of, you know, even I thought she understood the process and would be completely independent. She still needed that little assistance just to promote the thinking process a little bit. And from there on, she wrote the thing, and it's just magnificent. You can read it at your leisure if you like. There's a few more samples, elementary, middle school. There's a very nice high school level sample by a student here with 5 paragraphs. As I said, you can use these for essay contests. You can have them be compositions, articles in news papers or newsletters or family letters. It's kind of sad because the skill of the letter is being lost, isn't it? You know, very few people would think of writing a letter. And a lot of times the emails go kind of like this. Dear Grandma, thank you for the birthday money. Love you, Julia. And you think, that's just so thin, right? You say, Julia, couldn't you just tell Grandma a little more, like what's going on in your life or how you're going to use the money or something? Because that's just a little embarrassing. Change it into a 5-paragraph inventive writing assignment, right? And then it might go something like this. Dearest grandmother, when I arrived home from dance practice, I was excited to discover in the mailbox your birthday card to me. Anxiously, I ripped it open, and after carefully reading your thoughtful message, discovered your generous birthday gift check. I was ecstatic. I immediately began to think of possible ways to use that money. First, I thought, this would buy a lot of candy. My second idea was to share some of it with my brother. Lastly, the suspicion that I should save it for something I really want occurred. Let me tell you about these options. This much money would buy a ton of candy. I love those chocolate cherry macaroons that we get when you come to visit. I could eat a whole box of them. However, Mom says too much candy is bad for my teeth, and it's possible I might get fat. Heather says zits could be a problem. From looking at her, I agree. Therefore, although it is tempting, I will probably not be spending it all on candy. By sharing it with my brother, I might be able to buy myself a bit of peace and quiet for a while. It would also show goodwill. Unfortunately, I have noticed that my brother does not use his money wisely. He buys stupid, irritating, noise-making plastic things that bother the rest of the family and destroy the tranquil home that we so enjoy. Therefore, I will refrain from giving any of it to my brother. By putting it in the bank, I would be practicing the great American virtue of delayed gratification, because I am saving for something I really want. Have you seen the complete Samantha wardrobe and furniture kit in the Pleasant Company Girls catalog? This amazing kit costs only $995. At my current rate of savings, I have calculated I will be able to buy it by the age of 23. Therefore, while it is tough to do, I intend to put this money in the bank. In conclusion, Grandma, I want to say again how thankful I am for your constant generosity to me every year on my birthday. I am very much looking forward to your next visit, not only because I want to lose Scrabble to you again, but because, most importantly, I want you to see with your own eyes the magnificent Samantha wardrobe and furniture kit in the Pleasant Company Girls catalog, which I'm sure you will find is a stunning masterpiece of toy art. All my love, Julia. Now, you write a thank you note like that, and one of two things will happen. Grandma dies, heart attack, shock, or more money. Birthday gift check up, right? So, anyway, do read the other student samples at your leisure. I think everything's pretty clear. Are there any questions pertaining to Unit 7, what we've talked about so far? Yes, okay.
Does it matter which person the students write in for this unit or any unit?
Good question. Does it matter which person students write in? In this unit, I am extremely liberal, hands-off. Anything you want to do is fine with me, because it's inventive, creative writing. It should be free. So if they want to write it in first person, if they want to write it in second person and say, if you go to Disneyland, you will experience all these things. If they want to describe, in 1941, aliens from planet Zug secretly arrived on Earth and built underground caverns, and describe all that in the third person, anything's fine. They can do a radio show. They could be an announcer, a newscaster. They could do it in poetry, I guess. I'm pretty relaxed on this. And this is really where you can just let go and follow the Webster edict. Hands-on structure and style, hands-off completely content, because there's no need. So kids, by this time in the syllabus, they are really happy to have freedom to play with all the tools that you've taught them. And, I keep the topic clincher thing going because it makes it better. But I love to see experimentation and originality. And of course, most of my students are far more creative and inventive than I am. I'm very limited in my perspective, unfortunately, but I guess that's called getting old. Another question, Unit 7 question? Yes, okay, Thelma.
I guess I wanted to know, what would the timeline, you talked about the due dates, but how would you start teaching this, and how much would you teach in one day?
Well, Thelma, that is actually a question I never answer, because there is no one answer. A lot of people ask, how much writing should you do at a certain grade level over a certain period of time? And you can't answer that because everybody's different, right? People have different priorities. Dr. Webster, I think I told someone, he said to me one time when he was teaching 5th grade, we didn't really study social studies. We didn't really study science. We didn't really study a lot of things. We just wrote about it all the time. So in his class, kids were just writing all the time. Every time the superintendent would come into Webster's room and do an evaluation, the kids were writing. So he always got very high evaluation. But you as a teacher or a parent have to decide, how important is this? How much time do we dedicate? And then just determine what you can do. But I know you want a little rule of thumb. So I would suggest that if you can get 3 good paragraphs a week out of, say, an upper elementary, middle school kid, you're doing good. You're doing well. You're beating the average. If you can get a little more, great. If some weeks it's tough and you only get 1 or none, don't beat yourself up. It's just amazing how if you do this consistently over time, even in quantity less than what you might wish, you will still get well-trained students. So that's my non-answer for you. Good. Any more? Unit 7, questions, anything up to this point? Oh, Erin, do you have one? Okay, well shoot, that's why we're here, is to answer your questions.
How do you use student samples? Are they primarily for the teacher to look at in preparation for planning a lesson, or do you ever share them with the children in the classroom?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's wonderful to share student samples. One thing I do, and people have noticed this, at the end of a class or at the beginning of a class, if there was homework, I'll collect papers. I will read out loud the papers that I collected, not necessarily all of them if I don't have time, but I will read out loud to the students their own paper, rather than having them read it, for a few reasons. Number one, I can read loud enough so that everybody in the room can hear it well, whereas some students, they have little soft voices or whatever. Second thing is, I can actually read it better than they can. I can put in inflections and nuance and make it a little more dramatic. I can make their paper sound better than they can just because of my experience in doing so. And that's nice. It showcases it. And the third reason is I actually want them to hear it being read. I want them to hear me reading what they wrote. It's a different experience than if you're just reading it. So I generally don't say, read your paper. I say, I will read your paper. And then I've always got, in any group, I've got some kids who are, read mine, please read mine. And other kids, do not read mine, do not read mine, do not. And that's okay. I don't like to pressure anyone. But particularly when you're showing something new, like the topic clincher idea. Well, having the mini books and saying, aha, here's examples of topic clincher paragraphs, great way to teach it. When I teach high school level the super essay, for example, I bring in a super essay and have them actually make an outline from a student sample so they understand the structure of the super essay by analyzing it. So that would be another thing. So yeah, and one thing that's very interesting, Dr. Webster, when he was teaching African history in Dalhousie, didn't really use textbooks of any sort except this. He would put together the collected papers of one semester's class, and the next time he taught that class, he would have that copied off and in the bookstore as the required textbook for the next class. And so every class would read the previous class's final, collected papers, and then he would say, if you want an A in this class, you have to write better than this. And then he would use that to explain why those papers were good or bad and how you could imitate the good and avoid the bad. So, yeah, excellent. Okay, so that's kind of our traditional part of Unit 7, creative, now inventive writing. But there's another thing I discovered a few years ago that is just so charming, so enriching, so enjoyable, and so useful. I'm not sure where to fit it into the syllabus, but I've thought, let's put it in with Unit 7 because it is a creative, inventive kind of thing, and it is author imitation. Author imitation. Now, I got this idea a long time ago. I did a video series called the Advanced Communication Seminar, and one of those discs, one of those lectures, was called Power Tips for Planning and Writing a College-Level Paper. However, what it really should have been called was How to Spy on Your Professor and Figure Out His Writing Style so you can imitate that and get a better grade on every paper you write in college. Because really, it's funny, we tend to like what we do, right? And I've had kids go off to college and, write, and one professor really liked that writing, and another professor not like that writing. In fact, an interesting study was done by some students at the University of British Columbia where they took one paper and gave it to 12 different professors in 4 different departments and asked them to mark the paper, to grade it. And the range was from A- to C+. That different. So it does show. It's somewhat subjective. It's relative. It's what do you like in many cases. So I thought I'd love to teach this idea to these high school kids, but they don't have any professors to spy on and imitate, right? Plus, trying to figure out how one professor's writing style differs from another professor, it's less of a difference, right? We should start with something that's more different to teach this skill of analyzing style and imitating it. So I got the idea of giving them some different authors and trying to help them figure out what makes this author sound like this author and what makes this other author sound different. And so I thought, well, we'll start with things that are very different and work from there. So I think the first time we did this, I had Charles Dickens, the first page of A Christmas Carol, and then I had Hans Christian Andersen, The Little Mermaid, first page only, and then I chose, I think, James Finn Garner's book of politically correct fairy tales, where he doesn't say dwarfs, he says, height-challenged individuals, that kind of thing. So very different writing styles. And I said, okay, let's read Dickens and make a little checklist of what he does. Well, Dickens likes very short sentences, right? He uses triples often. He will use kind of adjectives sparingly, but not as sparingly as Twain and not as abundantly as Andersen. He throws in this little random narrator comment every now and then. and you can actually calculate what's the average length of his sentences, average length of his paragraphs. Does he use fragments? Does he ever start sentences with ly words, yes or no? So we did that. We analyzed Dickens, made a little checklist of what makes Dickens sound like Dickens, right? And we did the same thing with, no, it wasn't Hans Christian Andersen, I'm sorry. The first time I did this was Tom Sawyer. We did it with Tom Sawyer, and then we did it with James Finn Garner. I said, okay, homework this week is to take one of these two Aesop fables and try to rewrite this in the style of two of these three authors. So two fables with two different authors and try to imitate them. What would The Hare and the Tortoise sound like if Charles Dickens had written it? Now, this was, and what I recommend you do every now and then, an off-checklist assignment. We weren't using the dress-ups and openers and stuff because what we were trying to do was use some style techniques, but not others, to imitate a particular author. Well, I tell you, this was fantastic. They came back with such exciting, creative, interesting, good imitations that I thought, wow, I'm on to something here. It worked so well with that high school age group, I tried it a couple weeks later with my middle school age group, and that's when we used, Hans Christian Andersen, the King James Bible, and something else, I can't quite remember. Very different, and so what makes Andersen sound like Andersen? What makes King James sound King James-ish, right? And they enjoyed that. And so I kind of just started doing this every now and then with a group of kids as an off-checklist, fun thing to do. And what I found is they really love playing with this thing. They really do. So we've put in here a few samples. This one on page 121 is actually by one of my children who insisted that I use her middle name so that nobody would know. This would be The Hare and the Tortoise in the style of Dickens. Just read a little bit and see if it fits that in your experience. It has often been said that laziness will reap no rewards, and this was well demonstrated on the day that the hare agreed to race the tortoise. The bragging, strutting, egotistical hare had been teasing the tortoise about his slow pace until no animal even wanted to be around him, hear his words, or tolerate his being. And the tortoise, out of exasperation, offered to race the hare. The first thoughts that went through the mind of the hare were ones of ridiculousness and absurdity, but after a moment of pondering, which I must say was highly difficult for him, he comprehended the full meaning of the tortoise's suggestion and agreed with utmost confidence. Did this reckless animal realize what he was in for? I think not. But the preparations for the race continued, blah, blah, blah. And the title, A Tale of Two Animals, a direct allusion, almost too obvious. You see? Kind of nice. We've got some other ones. This was a retelling of The Eagle and the Jackdaw in the style of Garner's Politically Correct. Once upon a time, there was a lesser-statured jackdaw who was intolerantly excluded from the normal social circles of other adolescent jackdaws simply because he was born smaller than everyone else. In a secluded tree one day, our friend Jack was wistfully longing to be accepted for who he was when an eagle majestically fell upon an unsuspecting lamb and effortlessly carried it aloft. At once, Jack thought, how unfair it is that the eagle thinks he is greater than I. I will carry off a sheep as well. I will achieve equality with those entitled eagles who are always at the top of the social hierarchy. You get the trend there? So the vernacular working it in. Possibly the most magnificent one I ever found was a student who got into this so much. He did this not because it was an assignment. We had moved on into super essays, and he was still playing with this idea. And one week he brought it and said, hey, Mr. Pudawa, you want to read this? And he had chosen his own author to imitate. So here you have a retelling of The Tortoise and the Hare in the style of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. Once upon a day quite cheerful, there was no soul one bit tearful, save a weak but not quite weary little terrapin of yore. For he had received an earful from a rabbit who was fearful that his record of great running had become forgotten lore, a memory and nothing more. He's got it even down to the meter. And I said, wow, Robert, that is excellent. How long do you spend on that? He said, I don't know, 5-6 hours. That was his own time. That was recreation. But I've tried this with various grade levels and various students and various authors, and it works very nicely if you're teaching literature, because what I've noticed is that students really come to appreciate what they're reading once they've tried to imitate that a lot more. I first figured this out when I was reading A Tale of Two Cities with a group of kids. And I don't know if you've read this book. It's a tough book. And Dickens, characteristic of that time period like Melville, would spend long segments just describing something. I remember one section, it was 2 long paragraphs just describing a hallway. And this irritates modern kids because they want to, give me the plot, get the point, And so they're whining. This is boring. No. Why do we have to read all this junk? Can't we just skip it? I said, okay, tell you what. Here's your homework. I want you to go find a place, like a hallway or a room or someplace outside, a barn, any place. Go find a place and see if you can spin it out into 2 long paragraphs like Dickens did. Try to imitate Dickens and give as much detail on that place as he did. See if you can do that. Well, you know what? They discovered that they noticed a lot of things they didn't ever notice before about that particular place, and they never complained about Dickens' descriptions again. Same thing happened with Jane Eyre. Well, this conversation is ridiculous. It's going on for pages, and their sentences are 40, 50, 60 words long. Nobody talks like this. Nobody could ever talk like this. Right? I said, well, how do you know no one could ever have talked like that? You weren't alive then. But let's try an experiment. Take a scene from a movie that you know pretty well. Because a lot of these kids have seen movies like Princess Bride, 100 times. They have these things memorized. Take a scene from a movie that you know pretty well, or anything you want, but just a scene of dialogue, and see if you can write a conversation between 2 characters the way Bronte does in Jane Eyre and Rochester, right? Fantastic. They came back, and I read this stuff, and they had imitated Bronte's style, the speaking style, the eloquence. It was great. And you know what? They never complained about it again. Taught Beowulf. Now, that's a tough one. Right? Taught Beowulf, and I said, okay, I want you to take a parable from the Bible and retell it in the style of Beowulf. And I've done this with any number of literature things, and what I find is that as soon as a person tries to do it, a much greater, deeper appreciation for the person who first did it. And I guess to finish that up, I would tell you a little interesting thought. You can contemplate this. I have had a girl came to me at a conference one time. She's already 2nd year in college, and she says, I really want to be a good writer. I mean, I want to be a professional writer. I love writing. I'm going to major in English. What would you recommend for me to do to improve my writing? And I said to her, well, I would suggest that you take your 10 favorite authors and read and kind of analyze how they wrote what they wrote, and then try to write a story or a dialogue or a description or something in the style of that author. And maybe try several until you really feel like you can imitate that author. And then go to your next author and try to imitate them, and go to the next. And if you do your 10 favorite authors, right, you will have built yourself a repertoire of ways to do things. And that will expand your writing ability. And she just looked at me and she said, I can't believe you said that. I said, why? She says, that's exactly the opposite of what they have been telling me in college, which is don't imitate anything. And I thought, well, you know, there you have it. There you have it. Modern is the modern idea, but it's not working, right? And I guess there's a little story from the world of music, which is where I came from, that kind of illustrates this. There was a great Russian cellist named Rostropovich who studied with the greatest cellist, perhaps, of his time, maybe of all time, Pablo Casals. Any of you familiar with Casals? And so Rostropovich went to study with Casals, and the first thing they did was a Bach partita for cello. And Casals was trying to get Rostropovich to play it in a very, very exact imitation of himself. He wanted all the bowings and all the articulation and all the vibrato and all the intonation and all the nuance to be exactly. And this was going on week after week after week. Casals was trying to get Rostropovich to play it exactly like him. And Rostropovich was getting a bit frustrated. Finally, one week, he comes in, and Casals says, let me play for you. And he plays the same Bach partita and changes everything. Changes the dynamics and the bowings and the articulation, changed the whole thing up. And then he said to Rostropovich, now, find your own partita. The idea that once you could imitate to that precise, exact level perfectly, then you had the power, you had the resources and the privilege to go and be creative, inventive, discover your own voice, your own partita, right? So I just like that story because it kind of underscores that power of and value of imitation that we, I think, so easily have lost today. So I would encourage you to try some of this author imitation, and you've got a couple samples there to enjoy at your leisure. That pretty much completes our Unit 7. There is the practicum assignment for you if you're wanting to submit for accreditation, and that would be to go ahead and take the outline we did together on the cotton balls and submit that as a fully written out composition using the checklist on page 123, which is all 5 dress-ups, sentence openers, minimum roll, 1 decoration, and 1 triple. And if you're feeling ambitious, throw in a teeter-totters too, right? But hopefully you'll have fun with that, and you'll feel then even more well-prepared to teach your students this idea of inventive writing. So we're going to take a break, reinforce ourselves with sustenance, and come back for the big one, Unit 8, the essays.